Call the council meeting to order. Everybody stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, take the roll.
Mayor O'Connor.
Here.
Morissette.
Here.
Wakefield. Here. Knudsen. Here. Kennedy.
Here.
Bruck. Here. Hall.
Here.
All right, next up is citizen comments. This is an opportunity for people to weigh in on topics that affect the city that are not on tonight's agenda. If you do have something to say, please step to the podium and identify yourself and where you live. If you would also try to keep your comments brief and try not to repeat other people's comments. So it looks like we have somebody that would like to speak.
Good evening. My name's Larry Zyman, and for 33 years, I've lived here in Hudson up by the high school, and we love it here, and we don't plan on moving, although I have to admit that Carol and I last year made a small real estate purchase here in town. We bought our cemetery plot at Willow River Cemetery. Okay. So we're locked in with Hudson, and we're in this city that we consider golden. I wanted to take a few minutes today just to give you a little update on the Golden Rule Initiative and some of the things that we're up to right now. First of all, a reminder of who we are. The Golden Rule Initiative team is a nonpartisan group which strives for civility, respect, and understanding in our daily interactions by encouraging the practice of the Golden Rule throughout Greater Hudson. So members of this team includes people from the Y, the Rotary, the library, churches, our Chamber of Commerce, Hudson Schools, more, Scouts, and we're marked by a variety of opinions in our group that are highly valued, but not to the point where it robs those thinking differently of the dignity and respect that they're due as we navigate life together here in the St. Croix Valley. One of the great joys of being in this team is to see this team honor this commitment as we work through decision making and the execution of our plans. We've been working together trying to accelerate this civility, respect, and understanding since 2019, and I think the starting of that time was rather fortuitous. Some of the challenges we faced since that day. Obviously, there was the global pandemic. We had just the pain and all the aftermath of George Floyd's death. We experienced our own line of duty death with Deputy Katie Lysing here recently. And we find ourselves in yet another contentious election cycle, right? And I just want to remind everyone here that there are well-trained and well-funded forces that are seeking to fuel suspicion and mistrust toward one another rather than goodwill toward one another, no matter what it costs us relationally, locally. And we don't want to take this bait. We don't want to drink this poison, even as we maintain our personal convictions. We choose gold. I want to share a few of the ways that we're currently seeking to spread this message as we seek to bring greater positivity and tone to our community. So we seek to be a positive influence at other Hudson-based gatherings, such as the National Night Out, which will be dry tomorrow night from 5 to 8 down at Lakefront Park. We're also a regular presence at many of the music in the park concert series that are going on. On Sunday, September 1st, there will be Golden Rule Sunday, where Hudson area churches will share a video message and many of the congregation with the distribution of signs, bookmarks, and stickers being given to local congregations. It's not like my done time, is it? Sorry. All right. Also, I know that Hudson's Library, in cooperation with the Dick Whitcomb family and in Dick's honor, is creating an illustrated children's book that reflects the Golden Rule and will be published and given to every K through third grade kid in the Hudson area. And then lastly, I just want to highlight our third annual Booyah, which will be taking place on Saturday, October 5th from 2 to 7 p.m. at White Camp. Celebration of Hudson and all that we are. And I know many of you have helped in the past, and I'll be asking for your help again in the future. So as our elected representatives, I just want to ask for your ongoing support as we attempt the cause to continue to promote the cause of treating each other as well here in the area, this community we all love. I have a few gifts for you to take home with you. You've probably noticed them already. Stuck some bookmarks and some stickers for you as a reminder is there, and also brought some signs too for you to put up in your yard or to pass along to someone else or at your place of business. I want to close by thanking you for your investment in this community. These are tough days to be a leader. They're really tough. And I'm just so grateful that you continue to show up, you continue to serve, to make the Hudson a kind of a place that I love being part of it. That, I know we all love this place we call home, and, the many thousands who live here, not to mention the thousands upon thousands who visit this blessed piece of real estate we call Hudson. And I just want to say thanks.
Thank you, Larry. Any other comments? Any other comments? Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll close that portion of the agenda. We have a presentation, Meritorious Conduct Award for Police Officers. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So what we'll be doing today is awarding these two officers with Meritorious Conduct Award. So I will just read essentially the events that took place that day and explain a little bit about what a Meritorious Conduct Award means, and then we'll present them with the award. So on Friday, July 19th, 2024, approximately 3:09 p.m., Hudson police officers Tim Rue and Luke Radke responded to the report of a wrong-way driver on I-94 at exit 1. The report was the driver was driving eastbound in the westbound lanes of traffic. I-94 is an 8-lane interstate with fast-moving vehicles and semi-traffic. The stretch of roadway also has the heaviest traffic in St. Croix County daily, with tens of thousands of vehicles traveling it every day. Upon responding to the area, Officer Rue located the wrong-way driver who was traveling east in the westbound lanes. Officer Rue, along with the St. Croix County Sheriff's deputy, began to parallel the vehicle in an attempt to get the driver's attention and get the driver to safely stop. The vehicle failed to respond to their presence. As the vehicle continued east in the wrong lanes, the vehicle was weaving from the shoulder into the oncoming lanes of traffic. Speeds also varied between 25 and 70 miles per hour. The wrong-way driver passed multiple crossovers but failed to use them to safely stop or turn around. The roadway was heavily congested during this time, being rush hour on a Friday afternoon in the summertime. Officer Rue recognized the imminent danger of the driver posed to the public and decided to switch tactics. Officer Rue is PIT certified, which is a pursuit intervention technique and involves bumping the back of a suspect vehicle to spin them out in a controlled manner. He decided to attempt a pit maneuver on the vehicle into the grassy median. Officer Rue used one of the crossovers to position himself behind the wrong-way driver, also going the wrong way on the interstate, and began to position himself so as to end this life-threatening behavior of the wrong-way driver. While Officer Rue was repositioning, Officer Radke sped ahead of the wrong-way driver to another crossover where he turned around and proceeded toward the wrong-way driver in the opposite direction. Officer Radke was able to slow the westbound interstate traffic in an attempt to prevent a serious and fatal crash from occurring. Officer Rue was not able to effectively conduct a pit maneuver, and he coordinated a box-in tactic with Officer Radke, who is now a few hundred yards in front of Officer Rue and the wrong-way driver going the opposite direction. Officer Radke had mentally decided that if he had to, he was going to take the wrong-way driver head-on to protect the citizens of Hudson and St. Croix County if the driver did not stop. Both officers, Rue and Radke, were able to successfully box in the vehicle and stop the driver, bringing this very dangerous situation to a safe ending. Wisconsin wrong-way driver fatalities are nearly 3 times the national average. Wrong-way drivers pose a serious, if not fatal, threat to the public. It is clear that officers Rue and Radke protected the citizens of Hudson and St. Croix County without regard for their own personal safety and are most deserving of this Meritorious Conduct Award. And the Hudson Police Department has a variety of different awards that we can give officers and recognition for certain trainings or certain investigations that they've completed. Meritorious Service Award, Meritorious Conduct Award is the 3rd highest ranking award that our department can give. It's awarded to department members who distinguish themselves in the line of duty by acts of personal bravery, not falling within the guidelines of the Medal of Valor. It's presented to them in the form of a ribbon bar and a certificate, and you can see the ribbon bars that we wear on our dress uniforms. These are indicative of these types of awards. So with that, I will present Officer Radke with your certificate. Thank you. And nice job. And Mr. Rue, you get a certificate and a bar. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Consent agenda. Approve the meeting, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
That's you.
Go right ahead.
No.
Approve the meeting minutes from the July 15th, 2024 regular council meeting. Approve claims in the amount of $1,513,981.49. Approve use of fire department contingency fund for the purchase of a ventilation fan. Approve plans and authorize advertisement for bids for the 2024 downtown sidewalk and alley project.
You pull that one.
I move to approve with the exception of D.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item D. Roll call?
Morissette?
Yes.
Wakefield?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes.
Kennedy?
Yes.
Rook?
Yes.
Hall?
Yes.
Motion is approved, consent agenda is approved. Item D, approved plans and authorize advertisement for bids for the 2024 downtown sidewalk and alley project.
Thank you. I'd like to have a little more background from Mike or Aaron, whoever chose where the sidewalks were. And I don't know if this is related to when I had brought up that downtown sidewalks are terrible and people are hurting themselves. But some of this stuff is so spread out, it has nothing to do with the particular areas in front of our businesses and shops that have these bad issues, including Vine Street next to the Phipps Center. And there's cracks where people have fallen, and I've seen it. So it seems to be a little spread out more so. I have nothing, I have no concerns about the alleyways. We've talked about that, they need to be done. But I think this sidewalk stuff is spread out where it's not gonna really make a whole heck of a lot of difference for what I thought was more of a serious problem on our business streets downtown.
Sure. Yeah, I can explain more. Yeah, Maverick and I went out and basically did an assessment and kind of tried to balance finding the worst spots that have cracks or holes or trip hazards. I guess specifically if you're talking about Phipps along Locust.
No, Vine Street, the hill.
Oh,
Next to Buena Vista and down.
okay, yeah. That area, I guess, maybe there's a specific spot we missed that, you know. Oh, okay, okay.
So the reason we didn't do anything there is because there is a pending project. The Buena Vista is looking at redoing the retaining wall there, and it's been in the works for the last 6 months. And part of that project would be to include the replacement of that sidewalk going down that hill. So that's why I didn't have Aaron or Maverick included.
Great
in that.
news.
Yep, so
But-
that's why we didn't include that one.
Okay, but
Yep.
the other spots are probably from Vine Street all the way down to Walnut, if not. I don't know why commercial would need too much work, but on Second Street on the west side from, I would say, well, Buena Vista all the way down to Walnut, there, I know that some of the fiber optic work that was done addressed a lot of those issues, but there are still many sidewalk issues that need to be taken care of.
Yeah, and we did the evaluation before that came through, so honestly, we put together kind of our first pass. We would plan on going out and basically marking up the worst spots again, kind of in the field. And so, you know, it's easy to add other locations, so I wouldn't say that it's, you know, necessarily worth holding off on the plans. We could talk about maybe some specific areas of your concern after, and then, you know, easily include those areas. We were just trying to balance, I guess, the amount, especially with Second Street recently being redone. You know, we didn't want to go overboard. Locust Street, we really didn't want to do anything because we're planning to reconstruct that fully in a few years. So we didn't really focus on Locust. First Street, we might have a project coming up next year with some ADA ramps based on a traffic safety concern. And then, you know, so yeah, we just tried to balance not having to redo all of it and pick the worst spots and kind of go from there, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was done to my, I guess, my satisfaction, but, and I'm walking down there quite a bit. I think others here could probably say the same thing. I think we missed a lot of spots.
Sure.
And if, could you tell me why this took so long to roll out? Now we're going into the November to close the project? This whole
Yeah, I
thing?
guess there's just a lot going on. There's only 2 staff members in the engineering department. We wanted to focus on not hiring a consultant for this one. Maverick has been out in the field with the intern basically 100% of the time. So besides a few rain days, it's kind of been on me to try to get it all done. So it's just been a lot of work to get done with everything going on. So next time, if we feel like there's specific dates, we can talk about workload and hiring consultants if we want things out sooner. That's just more realistic. And AutoCAD for Maverick went out. That's a whole nother story, but
Next to parking, I think the sidewalk issue is one of the main things I hear downtown. So it's incumbent upon us to do this right. And I'm not gonna slow this down. I will, you know, move to approve it. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of stuff that was missed in the central busy district. And I don't much care that we just got done with the Second Street project. We need to get this done. This is safety just as much as the Second Street was.
Is it sidewalks that you're concerned about?
Absolutely sidewalks, yeah.
More than
Nothing
the
to do with
curb?
street, yeah.
The sidewalks?
Yeah.
So the curb would have been addressed on Second Street?
Correct, through the other,
I did have one question about them being grouped together because we're working with different building materials, if I'm not mistaken. The alleys are going to be tarmac, bituminous, whatever, and these will be concrete. Do you expect that are you going to offer those as separate bids, or are you hoping one contractor will do
one
all?
contractor.
Okay.
Yep.
Because they typically do, or they'll bring a sub in to do
Yep.
the second part if they don't do it personally, okay?
Yep.
Well, one thing, I mean, we are going to be talking about CIP here this fall, and even though we make plans a couple years ago of where we're going to spend things, as times and concerns change, we may need to look at that. I guess the idea of the spot treatment somehow seems a little inefficient, yet if it doesn't all need to be replaced, I mean, the property's owners certainly don't want a curb that's in good shape to be replaced just because, or the sidewalk, so you're trying to find just the individual locations. Is that
Yeah,
correct? Okay.
so it is hard with the condition of the downtown. You know, yeah, you could easily say in some spots, just redo it all, and we felt like, you know, we would like to probably push some more downtown streets to be fully reconstructed, so. it does-
sidewalks.
Well, no, even the roads, are in bad condition as well, so.
Hate to put you on the spot, but when is Locust?
Well, I guess we will
Is
have
that-
that discussion,
Based on what we do this fall, okay, because we have made a plan, am I right, to do all of Locust Street downtown here?
yeah, I think right now it's 2027, we talked about maybe pushing it to 2026.
Okay,
That's what I remember.
because that is in tough shape, the whole block, several blocks. Thank you. Thanks for your answers, appreciate it.
And I did move to approve.
I'll second.
Motion and second to approve. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Thanks, guys. Ordinance 8-24, amending Chapter 34, elections of the municipal code of the city of Hudson.
So this was, we're just saying, I don't know if it was.
Yeah, I'm looking, yeah.
So this was brought forth through the clerks through the state, and with the election cycle coming up, we had nothing in our ordinances recognizing the conduct towards our election officials. So with it being a heavy election year, I thought this was important just for the safety and concern of our election officials going forward.
Okay, so, I'll make the motion to suspend the rules since we have an election coming up quickly, and I think that this is important to get this passed.
I'll second that.
Do we say that? I just have one question reading the ordinance, and I'm not all that familiar with how the election officials work, but we do have, what, poll watchers or whatever that come in that have been approved, right?
Yep, they get approved every 2 years in December.
Are they included in this?
That's what this is protecting. Yeah,
Oh,
it's-
wait a minute.
To
A poll
protecting
watcher-
all of the poll
watcher
watchers?
is different. No, a
Okay.
poll
Well,
watcher
poll,
is
election
not.
official and a observer are two separate things.
Right, okay, well, that's what I'm talking about, the observers, I guess.
Poll
So,
watcher is self-appointed.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're not appointed by the city. The observers are not,
They're not.
This protects the elected officials.
that are working and conducting
Election
our
officials.
elections.
Okay, so
for the
they,
city.
so those observers, poll watchers, isn't there an approved list for those, though?
Observers, no.
No? And what the poll watchers are? What,
The election officials, the poll workers are appointed.
that, okay,
We do approve them or every 2 years.
okay, great.
And just to be clear, the statutory definition of election official, under 502(4)E, election official means an individual who is charged with any duties related to the conduct of an election. So this protects those that are actually conducting and facilitating the election on behalf of the city.
Okay, thanks.
Are you open for discussion now, or do you want to do the suspension first?
Let's suspend the rules first.
We have a motion and a second to
Right.
suspend.
Yeah, all right, so motion and second to suspend the rules, roll call?
Morissette?
Yes.
Wakefield?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes.
Kennedy?
Yes.
Bruck?
Yes.
Hall?
Yes.
Motion's approved, rules are suspended.
Motion to approve ordinance 8-24.
Second?
Got a motion and second to approve. Discussion.
Yes, thank you. I'm all for that we don't have the items that are defined in 34-6A with violent, abusive, indecent, et cetera. I'm just wondering about the enforcement of it, because when I first read it, I thought, well, our appointed employees that work for the city, city clerk, and deputy clerk would obviously be under this category. But as I'm reading it, it would be the people that we've approved the list and you've trained and selected that are poll workers or elected officials. Usually there's a chief official at each poll,
Chief
is
and
that correct?
assistant chief,
Okay.
yep.
So this would be, so are you saying that, would this imply that, let's say there was a Facebook post that was kind of a general comment? I mean, Les was alluded earlier during citizen comment. A lot of stuff happens on the internet and people say inflammatory, accusatory things. Would a person have to be named by name that so-and-so did something wrong? I just wonder if it's going to be difficult to enforce. I mean, I want the orderly conduct and respectful interactions, but tell me, I mean, you said this came from your state organization, Becky,
Yep, well, yep,
or your association.
yes, the Wisconsin Municipal Clerks Association.
Sure.
This is where it came from, so.
I'm just looking for input on that. How would something like that?
Well,
Yeah.
enforcement would be similar to the enforcement of any other ordinance. There would have to be a complaint. That complaint would then be forwarded to the police department. The police department would investigate. And if in fact there were a violation, then there could be a citation that's issued. We have to be mindful of First Amendment rights, of course. And so there's not a bright line rule to say what is violent, abusive, indecent, profane, boisterous, unreasonably loud. You know, really this is intended, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Becky, to make sure that poll worker, or that election officials are not harassed in the actual election setting. That there's not an intention to enforce other proper or protected First Amendment speech outside of really what's happening at the election site.
Correct.
Now, you know, certainly if there were harassing activity taking place as directed toward official or election officials outside of the election site, that could fall under, and certainly the PD could investigate, but this is really designed to protect people
On election day.
In the election space on election day.
100% behind that, for sure. I mean, it gives all those volunteers, I mean, they get a stipend to work there, and they're trained. And they're, I mean, that's one nice thing about small town in Hudson. I'm sure a lot of us go into the polls and recognize the people there. They're our neighbors, they're people that have done it over the years. So I absolutely agree with that intent for that day. I am concerned about the verbiage on item C, where it talks about no person shall send a telecommunication message. That does go out further, as you mentioned, as our attorney, inhibiting, I mean, it's harassment, it's inappropriate, I'm absolutely against it. But can we, I don't want us to put something in place that gets struck down, because how do we enforce it? Someone's sending a threatening, harassing text, putting something on Facebook. That was the only part that gave me pause, is how, and I don't know how our,
I think it's just got to be weighed on a case-by-case basis. If you end up naming somebody directly and threaten their livelihood or their personal being, their personal,
sure,
then you're going to
the law enforcement.
pass it on to law enforcement and let them weigh the differences,
Police officers would step in and investigate.
And it's not dissimilar to complaints that we might get right now for certain signs that are around town. There have been in the past signs that would appear to be profane. Those complaints get sent to the police department. You know, they look at it, they make a determination. They work with our office or with the city administrator to determine what's enforceable. You know, and generally we can't enforce profanity in general because it's a protected First Amendment right. This is really attempting to target people from reaching out directly to election officials. I mean, there's really not a need for the public to reach out to election officials for any reason. That being said, there may be some legitimate reasons, and it's only when those communications get to the levels identified that, you know, the police department would even investigate.
So you feel like we're within we're not overstepping First Amendment rights by having these guidelines in place?
Correct.
Law enforcement can
And
interpret and investigate.
Yeah, and I understand the First Amendment concerns, and any time that there is some sort of a complaint that implicates something that somebody has said, written, published, you know, that is an item that we look at to say, okay, well, sure, there is a complaint based on that particular, based on what was said. Do we have to look at what was said? You know, and does it implicate First Amendment, and is there something that is actually enforceable? And like I say, I mean, we've been through this process in the past where those complaints have come through and we've said, no, it's protected speech, and so that's as far as it goes. You know, here we're really trying to protect those people that are integral to the integrity of the election process.
And I do think it's nice to have that on the books, and specifically in person on Election Day. That's huge. So, thank you, appreciate the discussion.
Anybody else? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Discussion and possible action on special assessments for 2023 3rd Street Hill project.
Hi, Erin McPhee-Anderson, City Engineer. This item pertains to the special assessments on last year's 3rd Street Hill project. So essentially, the final assessment calculations came in higher than the preliminary numbers. We had a few citizens and property owners concerned with the cost increase. So staff has come up with some options for the council to consider addressing the calculations for this project and maybe these types of concerns in the future. So if you guys remember, last year's project was the 3rd Street Hill reconstruction from Walnut Street to Blakeman Boulevard at the top of the hill. And one very unique part of the project, and a large part of the project, was the reconstruction of the large retaining wall along the bluff area with the new barrier wall construction. So definitely a little bit of a unique project for the city of Hudson. So what Brent may have passed out or will pass out is kind of a table of the number of properties, the preliminary assessment calculations, the final assessment calculations, and then some numbers that pertain to the different options that I'm going to lay out here. So the first option would be updating, I guess, last year's prices to actually be closer to this year's 2024 street reconstruction project pricing for the assessable costs. So this would overall reduce all of the assessments for all properties about $16,000, and this would affect all the property owners. So this year's project, the unit prices for things like curb and gutter, concrete surface were actually less than last year. So, you know, that's one difference you get. We kind of assess based on that specific project's unit prices. That's what we did with the Third Street Hill project. But it is an option to say, you know, hey, is you know, looking at other average unit prices something that you would want to do. The second option is to extend the payment schedule for the properties that had an increase from the preliminary numbers. So this would affect about half of the properties assessed, and a proposed payment schedule is shown below. So essentially, people have the option to pay it by November 1st, essentially, or it goes on to their taxes for this payment schedule. So say your assessment is $1,000, that would go on for 2 years on your taxes, just automatically the city would do that. So some of the higher numbers, I just increased the time for payment. So if you have a $5,000 assessment, instead of it being split between 5 years, it would be split between 10 years. If you have up to $2,500, instead of 3 years, it would be split over 5 years, and that just kind of lessens the burden from year to year for the property owners.
Yep. And just to step in there, so this would allow them, just so everybody knows, this would allow them to extend it out to the 10 years. They would be charged interest annually on the amount that's remaining on their payments. So it's not, the city isn't eating any of the interest, it's a matter that they'll have to pay the additional interest portion. But we're holding the overall burden for, the city would be holding the overall burden for a total of 10 years as opposed to maybe 5 years. So that's one of the options we talked about.
And then, I guess I should mention, that first option about the unit prices is listed in the table, so you can kind of see the differences between, you know, what it was from the final assessment to what that option would be by changing the unit prices. So 3 is also on the table. So this one is to have an overall cost increase cap from preliminary to final numbers. So we recommended that, you know, we say the assessment cannot double from the preliminary to final, regardless of the total assessment. So for example, if your assessment preliminary number that you got before construction was $1,000, and after construction it was, say, $3,000, we would cap it at $2,000, just double what you were expecting to pay. And that would affect about 20 of the properties along the Third Street Hill project. And that is also, again, in the last column on your handout. And then the last option is more keep the final assessments and the payment duration schedule the same. I guess the process of the assessments was followed, and the final calculations are based on our current policy as written. So it's more of a leave as is option.
Well, I received a couple emails that I'd like to address and tell you where I'm at. And my concern is that at no fault of the residents' own, is it their fault that this assessment came in higher? What did we do? What didn't we see when we did the preliminary design work up there? And so why are we now penalizing our citizens for this? It doesn't settle well with me. So my thought is we don't charge them. We either do the preliminary assessment before the construction or option 1. But I just think there were some things, we knew it was a unique situation up there. So why were we so far off?
Well, if I can jump in there, I think the project costs, on any given project, things can go
I get that. I
askew,
get change
right?
orders. I've been doing this
Yep.
long enough.
So I would count this definitely toward that change order aspect. There was a change in the curbing that we had to do instead of by hand. It was done by machine, if I remember right. So there's a few things that we had to do on this project that is unique to the landscape and to what's there, right? If you look at the overall, I mean, being able to look at the bids between Vine and Green and this one, all the bids came in much, much higher on that particular project. Why? I mean, it's the same contractor, right? Same, you would think the same linear footage, the same everything else. But the contractor here and any other contractor, I think he was the low bid, all came in much higher for that particular project because of the unique landscape.
Yeah.
So I think, I know, it's easy to say, well, we should have calculated it out, but I think it's tough on some of these projects.
You weren't here.
Yep.
We delayed this project a year.
Exactly, and that's one of the things that increased the cost as
So
well.
then why shouldn't we have known that this unique
Yeah.
thing should have been dealt with and then clarified for our
A
residents?
lot of times you don't know till the contractor gets on site and starts working.
Again, no fault to our residents.
No fault to the residents. It's no fault to the residents that we waited another year to approve the project, which also increased the cost
So
significantly.
much like I've sat on the.
So I
zoning
agree with you, though.
appeals
There's
board,
a couple of things that
you
happened
have to
here.
find different criteria. We found one right here. This is a
Yeah.
unique plot of land.
Absolutely,
So I
yes.
don't think we should penalize it. I
Yeah,
think we
and
should
that's why we
say-
came up with these several options here.
Yeah. That's my thought.
It's a tough one. It
Can I
definitely
ask-
is.
I have a question, if I could.
Yep.
I know, like you said, this project went on, the planning, the conceptualization, I think I said that to you last year, Aaron. Oh, welcome to Hudson. You had only been on the job a couple months when this project was started. so
Couple
you-
weeks.
Couple weeks. So you weren't part of the design. And I do recall there was a interval in the middle of summer maybe where the whole project had to stop because of something that was discovered. Some re-engineering from our outside consultant was brought in. I never heard for sure, and I'm not going to put you on the spot today, but I'm interested if we had to pay extra for that or if they, I realize again, it's a unique hill, it's hard to do borings. It seems like they were partway in when they discovered a different type of soil or something.
Yes, they did. The retaining wall was designed with a certain footing based on rock. They found some spots that weren't rock. It was softer ground, so they had to change the design of the footing. So that brought in a delay. So yeah, there was a big change order related to that. On the front, well, not a lot from the consultant. They did charge us a little bit, but also the contractor, it was like over 100,000.
The change order was?
The change order
Yes,
was.
okay, thank you for refreshing me on that. Because they had to switch up what they were doing, or, yeah, that was difficult. And again, as we've all said, it's a unique part of Hudson. Does the residents pay for those sort of expenses, or are they paying more for just how much concrete is in front of their house?
Yeah, they're just paying for like certain specific items, like how much concrete's in front of their house. So the retaining wall cost isn't necessarily split among them, the other project costs, but, the contractors, we do our best to estimate project costs, obviously, but they can vary quite large, and sometimes the accessible items do vary, and it makes a big difference when like residents are paying 100%, $2 per square foot can add up to people, or $10 a square foot really adds up. And
Well, quite frankly, it's a lot easier to do work on a flat piece of ground or do assessments for a flat piece of property as opposed to what we have there, so.
So, given that, throw out the idea that it was a special situation. If this was a flat piece of property, what does our standard policy do when there are overruns? Do we always take a step back and say we promised A and now we have B, like we're doing right now, or do we?
it doesn't really say, that's why we're here, I guess.
Well, that answers my question.
But they have the options, if I remember, and Nick, maybe
Yeah.
you could step in here, but there's options for them to appeal, right?
Yep, yeah,
There's this option that we're doing now, and then
Yep.
there's one other, if I remember right.
So,
Yeah, so if the project costs come in substantially different, the council has already approved the final resolution on the assessments. And the council could come back after receiving a report from the engineer and look at the actual costs and approve a different resolution, approving different, an amended resolution, adjusting those assessments based on the actual costs of the project if it wants to. It doesn't have to do that, and that's where we sit tonight. I don't know that there's a request necessarily to change the assessments. You have different options as to how you can help the property owners deal with those assessments to the extent that you feel that, ultimately you need to extend out time for repayment, or you need to look at an adjustment based on what the city's share is of the project. But the council can always come in afterwards and redo the assessments if they want to take on more of that burden. That being said, property owners can also appeal their assessments, and they have there's a statutory process for doing that if they want to, if they feel like the benefit was not proportional to what they to the assessment. What they received is different from what the assessment was at the end of the day. So there are processes for dealing with it. That being said, city engineer heard from some residents, which is why it's before you to look at different options as to how you work through this. The other piece of this that is somewhat unique is that there's a grant involved, and that informed sort of how the calculations played out, because you had curb and gutter and you had sidewalk, and that's part of this too. It wasn't a straight line calculation as you would in some other projects. So there's just a lot at play, and the council gets to make a determination as to what it thinks is fair and equitable. If the assessments as approved were fair and equitable, or ultimately these costs that are associated with the final, or the assessments associated with the final project costs.
Okay, no, and thanks for that clarification. And I hear what Randy's saying, that this is unique in a couple different ways. But maybe going forward, I'm trying to think through the process. When we send out an assessment, we're hoping that we're pretty accurate, and then the burden goes on the city. And if we're wrong or things change, we get left holding the bag. So I'm wondering if there's any way to, a plus or minus 10% overbid, underbid type thing.
And
so
that's
that
a
the resident.
discussion. You're right. That's a discussion for, I think, looking at the overall ordinance. And I think those are things that we talked, and we kind of showed some examples under Aaron's report here on what some potential options are, where we could do a percentage difference. Maybe it's a 20%, maybe it's 100%, and we don't charge any more. Maybe it's something like that, maybe a 20, 30, whatever the percentage comes up with. I think all that has to be talked about on a committee level and brought back through. But I think what I'm hearing is there might be a desire to do some of that discussion.
I like to, so that not every assessment is always, we hope it doesn't go up, and if it does, then we're gonna get citizens upset at us, and we're gonna have to figure out how much we have to eat.
So the
That
difference
doesn't sound
here,
like a clean plan. So.
yeah, exactly. The difference here we're talking about is $16,000 more if you wanted the city to take on the additional burden.
Okay.
Whereas, it makes a difference maybe to some of these landowners where a couple of them almost doubled, or,
Yeah.
It does, and I've heard that in emails, just
Yeah.
probably like you have.
Yep. So, it's just a matter of maybe looking at it and coming up with another way to assess it and another way to do it.
Yeah.
Another way to
I'd
maybe
be
just
interested in-
eliminate them altogether. Silence. I just wanted to see where that was gonna go.
Yeah.
My sense of humor, I can't help it. So,
Because I'm just wondering, throwing it out there, devil's advocate, you've heard of that, Randy?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Had our numbers gone out to the residents as this 64,000, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion, right? Because we identified the true assessment costs, they knew about it, unfortunately, they're gonna have to pay for it. So I think we left the door open to get ourselves in these situations. So maybe going forward, we can talk about that. But for this, I do think that we should, either the one or the option one or the extended. I think we do need to.
well, you could
come
do a
part way.
combination too. If you wanted to do an option one and then still offer an extended extended time frame, that's up to you.
Well, I think again, just to me, option one is pretty darn close to what we already let the residents know they were gonna have to pay, so I don't know if we have to do too much stretching. Option three would be, that's where we could talk about the extended pay, but.
I have another suggestion. that if we go with option 3, that we waive the interest.
For option 2, you mean? The extended payment period?
Yeah, the
You have to
extended
look at that. I don't know if you
period.
can waive the interest on that.
Well, and I
I
don't,
don't think you can.
what I don't want is the council to get too creative
Yeah.
Okay.
in its thinking, right? I mean, somebody surely down the road will come back and say, you changed the rules for this project, so change it for mine.
That would have to be an ordinance change, I feel.
Yeah, that's a
That-
good-
Well, and this discussion has recognized special circumstances involved with this particular project. So, I mean, my suggestion would be that you either kind of think about right-sizing the project costs to what the residents were originally told, you know, or you extend out the time to allow for repayment so that it's not a burden in excess on an annual basis of what was planned for. But beyond that, I wouldn't start thinking about, you know, well, we could accept a tolerance of 20% now, or, you know, we're gonna waive interest on this one. I would think about what your overall goal is, and then work from there to craft that solution.
Yep, I agree.
So the difference between the preliminary assessment before construction and option 1 is only $341.74.
Let's go back to the preliminary then.
Yes, that would be my motion, is to move it back to the preliminary assessment that was given.
And then the city would cover the rest.
Yes.
So we've got a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. Thanks, Aaron. Ordinance 9-24, City Code Amendment, Short-Term Home Rental Ordinance Definition.
Okay, this is changing one piece of our current short-term rental to match state statute from 29 days to 7 days. We do know we have a moratorium on it now. We're taking care of this. It's a quick, simple date change to match the state requirements or the state statute. And obviously, we still need to, we'll work towards our piece on the moratorium, and we've talked about that with Nick and Mike
And
to start working, there he is, start working toward the moratorium solution.
And if I could just add, this is one of the reasons that we put the moratorium in place.
Yes.
Right? Because the council is not obligated to approve any short-term rental application. There's no right to a short-term rental permit. Although back in 2017, the right to rent law, you know, effectively said that if you are renting a property for 7 days to 29 days or more, you really have sort of a commercial interest, and communities can't outright prohibit short-term rentals of longer duration. That's really not what we're trying to get at here. But as we kind of work through this study process and identify what we want to accomplish and whether our current ordinance is accomplishing what it needs to with respect to overnight stays, 1 nights, 2 nights, 3 nights, which under Wisconsin law, we have the absolute right to make policy and make determination. We want to make that distinction. So as kind of an initial step, we want to make sure that there can be no argument that the city is preventing those 7 days to 29-day consecutive stays, that we are effectively, you know, eliminating those stays in the city at this point, which is why we're narrowing or proposing to narrow this particular ordinance at the moment to 6 nights or less.
Just the first of many steps that we need to do under the moratorium that we have on.
Correct, that's exactly
How long
right.
is the moratorium?
Now, we set it for a year. It can be extended at the end of that period if you'd like.
And is this something that we are, well, obviously doing our due diligence, but we aren't slow walking this out, are we?
What do you mean by
For any
slow?
particular reason? Should we
No.
just need to be accelerated or not accelerated?
The only reason that and this isn't an ordinance, so if you were to act on it, you would need to suspend the rules. I would suggest that the action be taken tonight to amend the ordinance so that there's not, some sort of an argument, an intermittent argument related to, properties that might think that this is a total ban on short-term rentals. It's not, again, it's a moratorium, and we're taking our time to study the issue. But what we want to make sure is that our moratorium aligns fully with state law, and that there can't be any particular arguments that, the city doesn't have the right to restrict or to otherwise regulate. So I view it as a priority item. If you want to take the time to act on it at a future meeting, you certainly can. But given the fact that the council has considered the moratorium, that we are working to study the ordinance, and frankly, the fact that we have short-term rental issues that we're working on in the city, I think it's important that the ordinance be clear, and that everybody know what the rules are, so that there's no question as to where the council sits on these issues.
Couple of questions, if I may. How, if this moves forward, how will we communicate these changes with the current license holders?
Well, it doesn't change anything
Doesn't
substantially.
it change their rent, how long they can rent their place for?
No, it doesn't. I mean, this is really what we're focused on here, is saying that anybody who is renting for 6 consecutive days or less is a short-term rental in the city of Hudson. To my knowledge, we don't have any short-term rental owners that only rent for 7 days or more, 7 consecutive days
Okay,
or more.
gotcha.
That everybody, and I say that with a broad brush, but my understanding is that all short-term rental owners and operators in the city of Hudson not only rent for longer periods of time, but they are also focused on renting for weekends as well. So what I want to make absolutely clear for everybody is that if you are renting for 6 consecutive days or less, or attempting to rent for 6 consecutive days or less in the city, you are a short-term rental operator.
Okay.
You cannot operate a short-term rental in the city of Hudson without a short-term rental license. You can also not operate a short-term rental in the city of Hudson without a county
Right.
license. So there are various different requirements that all come into play, but this would apply to everybody, but it doesn't change the fact that everybody is already considered a short-term rental owner operator, because they are all renting for 6 consecutive days or less. That nobody is, if there are renters in the city of Hudson that only focus on 7 to 29 days, they may still require a county license, but they would not be considered a short-term rental operator under our under our ordinance, because their rental terms are longer, and under Wisconsin state law, they are considered more of a commercial type renter than a short-term rental operator, a weekend rental operator, if you will.
Got it. And so if they were the commercial rental, there is no ordinance that applies.
All of the city's ordinances would still apply.
I'm sorry,
right?
there's no license. There's no license that would apply.
Correct. They would be treated like anybody that owns an apartment, that rents an apartment, right? And that's kind of doing the research on this particular piece of it. The state legislature basically said, you have short-term rental operators that operate like hotels, for example. You're renting overnight stays. And then you have other short-term rental operators that are operating more like extended stays. And effectively, they've said municipalities can't just impose an outright ban on those rental operators that rent and operate as those extended stay type operations, because they don't necessarily pose the same types of risks as those operators that would, rent to folks that come in on a nightly basis or for a weekend. And there are just different considerations. And in fact, it was part of this right to rent legislation and, you know, landowners' rights legislation that effectively says you can do what you want with your property if you are renting for a more sustainable period of time. But when people are in and out on a more frequent basis, that's where municipalities have the right to regulate and have the right to impose caps and have the right to be really restrictive because of the significance of the potential impacts on the communities in which these short-term rentals are operated. So it's really just, we're really just creating the distinction within our ordinance. Our ordinance back when it was adopted a number of years ago was more broadly drafted. It was fine because it covered everybody and it didn't ban anything in particular. But I presume that one of the discussions that we're going to have as the council studies this particular issue is, should we put a cap on the number of short-term rentals? Should we allow any short-term rentals? You know, is there some other threshold that we should be looking at? Well, if that's the case, once you hit the threshold, then you say no more. And so if you are one of those operators that only focus on 7 nights to 29 nights, you could make the case that if there's a cap, then there's a ban on that next application that comes in, right? So it's going to be important as we study this issue to differentiate and distinguish between those truly short-term rental operators up to 6 nights that we can fully regulate, potentially cap, potentially place other limitations on, you know, and those that focus on 7 to 29 days, consecutive days. And, you know, frankly, there may be some folks out there that decide that they just want to focus on longer-term rentals because they have a statutory and economic right to do that without the city capping or otherwise limiting the numbers. That doesn't mean that they don't have to comply with the rest of the city ordinances, you know, nuisances, disorderly conducts, you know, things that we've dealt with other properties. They still have to comply with all those ordinances, but it's just making that distinction between what we potentially can cap and can regulate from a numbers perspective and those that we can't.
Yep, so this is just a first step in the process.
Are you looking for action tonight or no?
Yes, please.
Move to suspend the rules.
Second.
Motion and second to suspend the rules, roll call.
Morissette?
No.
Wakefield?
Yes.
Knutson?
Yes.
Kennedy?
Yes.
Brock?
Yes.
Hall?
Yes.
The motion's approved, rules are suspended.
Why are,
Ordinance 9-24.
Second?
don't you want us to delve into this more, or what? Or am I understanding you wrong? Why are we, don't do just first reading first?
You certainly can, and that's certainly you're right. From my perspective, I don't know that there's any fact finding to do on this particular ordinance. It's not a question of whether there are folks that are renting for 7 days or more, or, you know, less than 7 days. Again, our understanding is that everybody falls within this bucket. It's a matter of cleaning up your ordinance to comply with the state law.
Right.
Potentially, if you want as a council to have available as a tool a threshold for the number of short-term weekend rentals that you permit within the city.
So you answered my last question before the motions were made then, that, yeah, okay, this is gonna be in place, so we should lift the moratorium.
No, not necessarily. The moratorium is, the moratorium's in place.
Randy's earlier question, if I'm hearing it correctly, is, you know, where are we at on the overall study? And in the issue sheet that was drafted, it talks about in September, the first meeting in September, we'll bring an RFP forward for consideration to go through a community involvement process, as well as additional planning, study, and analysis of, I mean, we aren't the only community dealing with these issues at all. I mean, you hear about it all over the place. And we are certainly not alone in this. There's probably some good examples out there. There's some probably really bad examples, and we'll have to kind of we will have to sort through all of them, but we'll have to go through a study, a process, and we'll be bringing that forward at
So why are we slapping the ordinance down now?
This is just cleanup, definitions cleanup. First reading's certainly fine. I mean, regardless, I think this is a pretty
I think we're also defining who we're talking about.
right.
If we don't do this, it's someone that rents it out for a month versus someone that's gonna do it for a Friday night. We're trying to just identify who we're focusing on.
Yeah,
That's
and-
my understanding of it.
And from my perspective, it's just cleanup. I don't want any arguments from any short-term rental owner or prospective short-term rental owner that says your moratorium is invalid because you can't ban short-term rentals if I only focus on 7 to 29 days of occupancy. And my answer to that is, you're right, and we're not taking that position. I want to be absolutely clear in the ordinance that we focus on 6 nights, 6 consecutive nights or less. And then what's going to happen is whatever process the council sets forth for public engagement and for discussion by the council or a subcommittee or, however it gets studied, that those are really the short-term rentals that we're looking at. And then the question is, does our ordinance as it exists on our books today meet our needs? Should it be changed? Is it too restrictive? Is it too lenient? But I want to make sure that everybody understands moving forward in this process that we're only dealing with that narrow subset of 1 night to 6 nights, and that we're not dealing with 1 night to 29 nights. So it truly is cleanup so that we can take the next step then to focus in on the short-term rentals that, really impact our neighborhoods and our housing stock and whatnot.
I wanted to ask a question when the
Yes.
ordinance was first, excuse me.
I just want to get back, there was a motion
there a
being
motion?
made.
Did you second?
Oh, well, I didn't hear the second. No, I apologize. Okay.
That's okay, thank you. I thought I did, but I wasn't positive. When we first enacted an ordinance 2020, how much public input did we have at that time? I see your suggestions that we'll do so going forward in the next year, months and year.
Yeah, I have to go back. It was not a lot.
Okay.
It's not within zoning code, so it's not really a public hearing. I'd have to go back to look to see if we had a public hearing, but.
But it wasn't necessarily structured, whereas now
Right.
you're thinking
Right.
that we will allow the opportunity for residents to formally
Yep.
speak their
Yep,
mind about it.
to
Okay.
engage in the issue.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion is approved. Pre-annexation between the City of Hudson, pre-annexation agreement between the City of Hudson, Wisconsin and LMBRJK Properties LLC for an annexation proposal at 604 Old Highway 35 South.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just to kick this one off, we haven't done a pre-annexation agreement for a while, and I think a few of you may have not been on council since we've done one. But I want to preface it by saying this does not mean that we're annexing said property. It doesn't mean anything of the sort. This effectively kicks off our process of review. This property located just north of the new Boucher apartment and south and I guess east of the Hudson Meadows subdivision on Old 35 in Hanley. It's the old park and ride. It's about a little over 1.5 acres. It was the DOT recently sold it to the new owner, we'll call it Lumberjack acronym. So what this does is it requires the owner and the applicant to submit a deposit in the stated amount of $25,000 for us to, for the city to go through its capital cost study. So what that tells us is, okay, what's it gonna cost for the developer to serve it with sewer and water and storm and all of those other things. So both on-site and off-site improvements that would be necessary. as well as any improvements that would need to be made to Old 35 and/or Hanley or intersections. The budget study, the other study that we do, tells us, based on what they're thinking of doing in terms of multifamily, what can we anticipate in terms of property tax revenue, and alternatively, what's it going to cost for us to provide services, police, fire, EMS? What can we, is this going to be a beneficial annexation, from a business standpoint, to the city too? So that's what those studies do. It helps us pay for all of that, or it pays for all of that. The city does not pay for any of this. So we bring on a consulting firm, one of our engineering consultants, either Bolton and Mank or SEH. SEH has done the majority of them for us in the past, to go through these. And then we work through that process. And then, once that's all said and done, we'll have all that data in front of the council to consider when they consider the potential approval of an annexation agreement or annexation ordinance for the property. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
We have a motion?
I move to approve.
Second.
Motion second to approve. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. All right, one thing that I would like to say is, I think I would like to note the passing of Dick Trendy, who is another one of our highly respected and long-term public servants. Police officer that served our community for 34 years, I believe. Started out as a patrolman, worked his way up into detective and sergeant, and became our chief of police from, from 1993 to 2006. So it's unfortunate. Dick was a great guy. Didn't know him all that well, but I did know him a little bit, had interaction with him when we first moved into town. Not official. But Dick was really a great guy and a great public servant. So to his family, we did want to note his passing and once again recognize his service to the city. That's all I have. Anybody else?
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Was there a second?
Yep, second.
What's going on here? I can't. Normally it's you that can't hear me.
Wasn't very close.
All right, we have motion and second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's approved. We stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.